Without further ado, I would like to welcome Jean Asselborn, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Frans Timmermans, First Vice President of the European Commission. Good evening, gentlemen.
Machen wir das ohne Hocker.
Voilà, holt ihr ruhig Platz, Sie können sich setzen, wie auch immer, wie es Ihnen bequem ist. Bon, da gibt es so ein, würde ich sagen, wir fangen an. Wer möchte denn die erste Frage stellen?
Right. Who would like to ask the first question?
Das ist immer schwierig. Nein, hier haben wir schon jemanden.
It's always a bit difficult, actually, to kick off.
Ich hätte eine Frage, also intelligent von der...
Yes, I have a question here about Greece. It's about Greece. As we all know, Greece actually had to sell all its assets to China. Do you think it's the good idea, actually, to expect from Greece to sell all they have to China?
Sie müssen wissen, ich komme aus Limburg.
Please note that I come from Limburg in the Netherlands, and it's a bit similar to Luxembourgish, but, well, I sort of got the gist. And first of all, on behalf of the Luxembourg government, I would like to thank you. Thank you also for the people who have chosen actually to join us tonight instead of watching the game. Thank you to Frans Timmermans and to Daniel Welter for moderating this evening. Greece and the port of Athens being sold off to the Chinese. Well, if I have to answer that question, I would like to go back in the past, because at the time Greece went down, times were chaotic in the EU, and we told Greece that as far as possible they should find money as much as possible, really, to get back in the black. And they sold the port of Athens to the Chinese. I was there in last December. There are camps of refugees, but the port and the harbor really is operating, or operates quite properly. The thing is that they no longer had the means actually to operate the port properly. So it was the only solution they were left with, selling off the port of Piraeus to the Chinese. And they tried, Mr. Timmermans now. Yes, I would say that we try to work together, but of course I'm not candid. I know that we need to see to it that everybody actually plays according to the books and to the rules. And when we talk about the Chinese, when we talk about know-how, of course we have to protect the European assets. And the EU Commission came up with a proposal. When you have a look at what's going on worldwide, I'm sure that our system has to be defended, and properly defended in an appropriate manner, not saying we are the strongest ones and you will listen to us. Certainly not. Of course, all stakeholders must now abide by the rules. I think we are in a position to convince the Chinese. For Trump, I'm not quite sure, but I guess that over time, actually, we will be able to get back in business with the Americans. And this will, of course, be very important for the business. Next question.
Messieurs, bonsoir. Quel est votre...
Good afternoon. What is your opinion about the trade war that was declared by the Americans? Actually, the Americans declared a genuine trade war with the tariffs they are now imposing on steel, and we actually apply tariffs on peanut butter. But what's your opinion about that? Right. This is a paradigm shift, really. What we've observed for now a year and a half, when Mr. Trump actually took office, what we've observed is that Europe has always been in favor of open trade, open international trade. Of course, there are problems with the WTO. I was in Kenya, I was in Argentina. WTO now is at a still stand. That we must say. But this being said, there was and there has been, let's say, between all the partners, especially between Europeans and Americans, there had been actually a feeling to really comply with the rules and to comply properly with the rules, because when you have a look at what's going on in the US or in Europe, is interconnected. Now, when you have a look at the current situation after the decision that was made on tariffs by the Trump administration, we are now living in different circumstances, and quite frankly, my fear is that they won't stop at steel and aluminum, and that cars could also be hit by American taxes and American tariffs. I sit on the Trade Council, and the commissioner in charge, who's a Swedish lady who has made tremendous efforts with Ross, for instance. Well, they said at the end of the day that the decision would be made by the president. The thing is that he made the decision, and the world order based on multilateralism, based on cooperation across the regions worldwide. Well, this world order, this multilateralism really stands for the world order, or has stood for this world order. The thing is that now things are changing, and it's probably due to the fact that it will probably lead to the fact that the wealthiest nations won't suffer from this, or not that much. The problem is that the poorest nations will probably take the brunt thereof, and the EU Commission came up with a proposal, a counter-proposal to react to the Trump administration decision. They think about the Harley-Davidson bikes. They said that they would relocate part of their business outside the US, and quite frankly, I don't think that in the long run the trade war will be in the vested interest of the Americans. The thing is that with the trade war, there will be no winner. Everybody will lose, and we've seen this in the 30s. And I'm really irritated, because during that economic downturn, the world avoided protectionism. And now, all of a sudden, now that the economic downturn is behind us, for purely political reasons, now we are entering a trade war. And there is absolutely no protection whatsoever in protectionism. But when you think about, and when you speak about isolationist policy, you will hear the word isolation. And I'm quite sure that at one point of time, the Americans actually will figure out what it means. But until then, it will mean a lot of jobs lost, and it will also mean that it will hit the economic growth, and it doesn't make any sense, absolutely no sense whatsoever. So I'm not sure that the EU will be able to convince all partners that it's not the best way, really, to move ahead.
Ok, bon, merci beaucoup pour être là aujourd'hui pour la conférence. En fait, j'avais des questions, mais je vois qu'il y a plusieurs personnes. Je vais donc poser.
Very happy actually to be here tonight. In the night from the 28th to the 29th of June, the EU tried to find an agreement, a voluntary agreement. Countries like Hungary and Poland have always been against, actually, some rules in terms of migration. So they have found a voluntary agreement. So here's my question. Don't you think that such an agreement or a voluntary agreement on migration issues is kind of cave-in really, and accepting Orban policies would be the norm, because Orban has kept on repeating that he would not take any refugees. So don't you think that it was a kind of way to cave in, really, and to give up, really? Because if Orban and all his partners actually have pushed the EU to cave in, really, don't you think that he will try to do it again in the future? Listen, the migration issues is here to stay for 2 generations at least. So don't think that by one decision made during a European Council meeting, the question will be solved. Have a look at the demographics in Europe or in Africa. Have a look at the figures. There are differences in terms of economic development, and if we don't actually adopt an overall policy to manage the migration issues, we won't get there. What does that mean? It means that we have to protect the European borders. That's necessary. Second point, we need a long-term project for the development of Africa. That's going to be really necessary, because without such a project, how is it possible for young Africans really to think about their future? There are talents and competencies also in Africa. Then we need also to settle the issues about smugglers. And these people really conduct their terrible business to the detriment of populations. And last remark, we need, even if it's not very popular to say that today, but Europe will need a legal migration policy to really deal with its own future. This will only be possible if all member states show solidarity with one another. So either it will be this or it won't be at all. Because at one point of time, they will be convinced that we need to stick together and to get together, and we need to act together. All countries will have a part to play, and I'm probably much more optimistic than the day before yesterday or last week. But quite frankly, I also know very well indeed that there are many steps to be still made to deal with a question that won't be solved in a fortnight. Well, dear Frans, I'm not that optimistic. Since 2015, we've done a lot to protect external borders, EU borders. 10 measures were taken to better protect the EU external borders with the Coast Guard, sailing off the Libyan coast, plus the resettlement policies, and so on and so forth. But the thing, actually, the bone of contention, really, is also about the fact that it's disillusional to think that the population will think that it's an agreement. Why? Because we didn't deal with internal responsibility. A proposal was made by Filippo Grandi, who is the head of UNHCR. Filippo Grandi actually invited us to Libya. He said, you should go to the EU plus IOM and the UNHCR should visit Libya and try during that visit to see what could be done, what could be achieved to identify the people who would be covered by the Convention of Geneva. If you find people who would like to travel to or to emigrate to Europe, you will need a resettlement policy, as we have had with Turkey. And this system will only be operating properly if Europe is happy to take these people not on a voluntary basis but on an obligatory basis. Now, if we need also maybe to check on harbors and ports to identify the people who are covered by the Geneva Convention. And from that identification, and it was the UN proposal, from that proposal on, actually, people could be relocated or could be resettled, rather. The thing is that with the urbanization of this policy, now I've heard people saying, now this is a battle that we have won. We want a system which is similar to the Australian system, but this is wrong. This is wrong because if we apply the Australian model, we will no longer be living in the EU that is based also on the Convention of Geneva. And this is certainly not the Europe or the vision of a Europe that had the founding fathers. So if we can't show solidarity to share the burden across the EU member states, and we've been failing, we've been failing since 2015, actually, to do so. And as long as we don't, as long as we are not able to share the burden, we will not be able to solve any problem, really. And that's why at the next Migration Council that will be held on July the 12th in Innsbruck, I'm going to go there. I'm going to be there. And I really want to see this paradigm shift that has been announced by the current presidency, which is the Austrian presidency. And this is really what is at the core of our business. Some people really have to escape their country, and the answer is certainly Fortress Europe, certainly not.
Et je vous assure, et je le dis aussi à Jean, si on ne trouve pas un moyen de mieux distinguer ceux qui ont le droit à l'asile et ceux qui viennent ici sans avoir le droit de l'asile, personne n'aura plus le droit à l'asile. Donc il faut quand même créer un système où ceux qui n'ont pas le droit à la protection internationale soient en mesure de rester où ils sont ou de retourner au pays d'origine. Si on n'organise pas ça, tôt ou tard, on aura vraiment le système australien. Tôt ou tard, il n'y aura aucun soutien dans les États membres parce qu'on dira tous ceux qui n'arrivent n'ont pas le droit à la protection. Donc on doit vraiment améliorer nos politiques. Et en plus, je te dirais, je ne crois pas qu'on doit être tellement pessimiste. Depuis 2015, on a eu une diminution de presque 90% des nombres de gens qui sont arrivés en Europe. La crise actuelle n'est pas une crise migratoire, c'est une crise politique. C'est une crise qui se joue sur l'âme de l'Europe, sur nos valeurs. Ceux qui sont les pourparleurs du système australien, ils veulent enlever une partie de l'humanité de ceux qui cherchent une protection. Et c'est notre devoir en tant que social-démocrates de prévenir ça. Mais on peut seulement les arrêter si on a une réponse crédible aux questions de nos citoyens qui nous disent « Écoutez, il est à à l'heure que vous ayez des réponses concrètes, que vous soyez en mesure de distinguer ceux qui arrivent ici et qui ont le droit à la protection et ceux qui sont venus mais qui n'ont pas le droit de rester. Donc là, vraiment, il faut améliorer nos politiques et je crois que c'est la seule réponse aux populistes qui veulent foutre à la porte tout le monde qui n'est pas comme eux.
Je suis tout à fait d'accord avec toi, Frans. Et c'est là le fondement de la proposition des Nations Unies, de l'OIM, donc l'Organisation internationale de la migration, et de l'UNHCR, c'est-à-dire le Haut Commissariat qui s'occupe des réfugiés. Ils ont proposé cela. Ils ont proposé qu'en dehors de l'Europe, par exemple en Libye, là où j'étais en Libye il y a quelques mois, j'ai vu les gens dans les centres de rétention, mais j'ai vu aussi l'OIM qui ramène les gens qui ne sont pas sous la Convention de Genève, qui sont ramenés au Sénégal ou au Cameroun. Ça existe déjà, 18 000 personnes ont été... Mais le système ne va fonctionner, et c'est ça ma critique. Je crois que chacun doit l'accepter. Ma critique, elle est celle-ci. Si des gens tombent sous la Convention de Genève, que ce soit à l'intérieur de l'Europe, que ce soit à l'extérieur de l'Europe, il faut un système de répartition. Aucun pays ne va accepter un bateau avec 250 migrants comme maintenant à Malte, si par exemple Malte, qui est maintenant concernée, ne sait pas que faire avec les gens qui sont sur le bateau. Qui va aider Malte? Qui a aidé l'Italie? Et les résultats de l'Italie, c'est pas par hasard que ça s'est produit. Et qui va aider la Grèce? Donc, ceux qui doivent aider, c'est tous les pays, tous de l'Union européenne. Et là c'est le problème où on n'a jusqu'à présent pas trouvé de solution. On a trouvé beaucoup de solutions. On peut renforcer Frontex, on peut même mettre l'armée nord-coréenne à nos frontières. Il y aura toujours des gens qui vont être en Europe parce qu'ils sont poursuivis et leur seul moyen de survivre, c'est d'avoir un accès dans un pays où ils sont respectés, enfin dans une région où ils sont respectés. Et c'est là, Frans, et là, nous sommes tous les deux sur la même longueur d'onde, que l'Europe, plus qu'aucun autre pays sur la planète, parce que l'Europe, tous les pays de l'Europe savent ce que c'est l'asile. Ils savent ce que c'est la migration. Même nous, petits luxembourgeois, nous le savons ici. Et donc là, je crois que cet effort doit être poursuivi et ne pas dire on a trouvé maintenant des solutions sur les frontières extérieures et c'est fait. C'est ça le problème.
Merci. On va sûrement revenir à la migration, mais il y a beaucoup d'autres questions, donc je passe la parole ici.
Bonsoir. Moi, je voudrais en fait savoir quels sont les plans pour les universités européennes, s'il y a des avancements ou pas du tout. Les plans, oui, projets. Ok.
Moi, je crois que l'un des projets les plus performants, les plus beaux qu'on n'a jamais vus en Union européenne, c'est Erasmus. Et c'est pour cela que la Commission propose maintenant de doubler les effectifs d'Erasmus et aussi d'élargir ce programme. Parce qu'Erasmus, c'est quand même un programme très couronné de beaucoup de succès. Il y a plus d'1 million d'étudiants qui ont déjà étudié dans un autre pays membre grâce à ce programme. Mais c'est aussi un programme un peu élitiste, seulement pour les étudiants universitaires. Donc il faut quand même élargir le programme, aussi que les jeunes qui travaillent, les jeunes qui ont une formation professionnelle, aient la possibilité d'aller dans un autre pays membre pendant 6 mois, pendant 1 an. Et je le dis aussi parce que j'ai fait la même chose quand j'étais étudiant. C'était à l'époque, parce que moi je suis né sous l'Ancien Régime. Donc c'était à l'époque très difficile d'aller étudier dans un autre pays membre. Moi je voulais aller étudier en France et je devais encore faire mon service militaire. Et puis il y avait un problème de finances. Et puis j'étais au poste de police pendant des journées à Nancy pour être enregistré. Et tout ça, c'est le passé. Maintenant c'est beaucoup plus facile. Et je le dis aussi parce que qu'est-ce qu'on découvre en étudiant pendant 1 année à l'étranger? On découvre une nouvelle culture, un nouveau pays, mais on fait une découverte encore beaucoup plus importante. On se découvre. Ce n'est que étant dans une autre culture pendant une certaine période qu'on reconnaît sa propre culture, qu'on connaît son propre pays, qu'on connaît sa propre société. Et c'est là la grande richesse de la société européenne, toute cette diversité et en même temps des valeurs en commun. Et c'est pour ça que vraiment, j'insiste, il faut élargir le programme Erasmus, il faut l'appliquer aussi aux professionnels, à ceux qui travaillent, et comme ça, on créera une société qui est plus consciente de sa propre culture et qui n'a pas peur d'autres cultures.
Merci. Monsieur Archibald, vous voulez ajouter quelque chose ou bien on passe à la prochaine question?
Guten Abend. Schon eine Frage zur Migration aus ökonomischen Gründen. Das heißt, die Europäer produzieren an Afrika, so dass die Leute keine Zukunftsperspektiven haben.
I have a question about migration. Those who migrate for economic purposes. So if Africans come to Europe, they shouldn't be offered future prospects. But why couldn't we find a commercial solution instead of stopping them from coming? So the point I was trying to make, well, is that it is a very important issue. And by the way, I would like to thank the European Commission and many European member states who are not just fetishists applying 2% for the NATO. The NATO summit will be held next week in Brussels. And we will hear that the countries that do not spend 2% of their budget for defense are underdeveloped countries, politically speaking, of course. Well, of course, the cooperation policy must be kept at a very high level, dealt with at a very high level in Europe. European Commission does it, and France, well, the Luxembourg and the Netherlands also consider this as being of paramount importance. We shouldn't apply the principle of the less for less, which is somehow a buzzword, like to say that countries who do not cooperate in the field of migration will miss cooperation. I agree with those who say each country has to take back its own citizens. In German we say, well, an expression that said that it falls under international law. Now, punishing, sanctioning the citizens of those countries by weakening cooperation is a big mistake. I am not the Minister for Cooperation in Luxembourg, but in Niger, for example, there are training courses to allow young people to learn how to farm produce and to make a livelihood. So that kind of things is key, and that cooperation potential which is applied by the European Commission and many member states should not decrease, that just the other way around. Europe made a few mistakes in Africa, and Africa is the continent of the future. So everything relating to cooperation is important. There are now summits taking place between the African Union and the European Union, and they talk about the economic partnership, the setting up of economic partnership, and I think that we should go further down that road. Well, it was also with regard to trade and or the business sector. It's always possible to improve trade with African countries. But there are already a lot of exchanges without applying taxes at the European borders. What is required in Africa is investments that will lead to a sustainable growth. In some African countries there is huge growth, but actually not all citizens benefit from that growth. So there is also the issue of the state of law. because profits reach the pockets of a small elite, and then the youth wants to be part of that society, but the young people are excluded for political reasons. So I think that a lot remains to be done with regard to this in Africa. Well, actually, at the end of the day, it's very clear. If it doesn't work in Africa, it won't work in Europe. If we abandon Africa, if we give up with Africa, I think we make a big mistake. We have it wrong. Either we have joined African-European cooperation, or I'm sure that we will, it will backlash in Europe. In Europe, there's an important demographic growth in some African countries. In Niger, the average number of children per woman is 7. So I'm not criticizing, this is not what I'm here for, but the whole of Africa will experience a huge demographic development. So I think it's very important to focus on education, to invest in education in Africa. That would be a enabling factor for the stabilization of these countries. Good evening. Thank you for being here with us today. As you may know, in Europe and the European Union, a lot of citizens are fed up with the European Union policies. So don't you think that the priorities of the European Union should be changed in order to focus more on citizens, to focus more on harmonization in the fields that have a direct impact on citizens? I will speak in my language, I will speak French. Your question is a bit vague. What are people interested in? Everything we said so far should raise the interest of everyone, being students at university or the migration issues. The results of the Italian elections are linked to the migration issue, but it also relates to social issues in general. If you think that Europe should be more looking at social issues, then I fully agree with you. There are in Europe lost generations. There are countries in Europe with lost generations, and Europe may be the only solution, the only way to go forward, maybe the only way to hope for something different, maybe the solution for all these young people who have studied for 8-9 years and who find themselves unemployed. Everything we do in a small country such as Luxembourg, be it with regard to the infrastructures, with regard to social economic policies, everything actually relates to Europe. The migratory policy cannot be solved by Europe on its own, or the climate change policy issue cannot be solved in Luxembourg only, or in Germany. Security in Europe, tackling terrorism, that cannot be done in one country only on its own and by closing its borders. This is why we need Europe. You may criticize all the political leaders, all the European political leaders, but because they outline bad policies. But let's not forget that at the end of the Second World War, powers were transferred to the European community at the time in order to be better equipped and in order to better face the issues that are at stake today in Europe. I hope that you don't think that everything we do in Europe is totally wrong, that we are missing the point. But if you have that perception, you should say why. You should be more concrete. Are people fed up with the European policy and that's it? Well, France, maybe you have understood better than I have. I will speak German. What has most changed since 10 or 15 years is that people are now more aware that they depend on one another, and it is not pleasant to feel that. Because actually citizens or people think that they cannot trust the other European citizens. Everybody has the impression that he or she is doing the right thing and the others are not. And this is well rooted in Europe, and I have experienced the same in my country. I come from a small country, but the whole of Europe has looked at us, because everybody knows that what happens in the Netherlands will have an impact on other countries. And that leads to worries and concerns, because the results of German elections will have an impact on the citizens on another country. And everything about the Brexit, the impression we have about the Brexit is comes to the fact that people have the impression that they do not master their destiny, that they don't control the Brexit. And this is how it all boils down to the emergence of nationalisms, thinking that all problems could be solved that way. This is not true. Nationalists do love their countries, but the populists do hate the other countries. And if we start hating the others, we'll never come out of that end. We need the European member states, and the European member states have to show solidarity. If someone says, I depend on you, this should be felt as a threat, but rather as a way to cooperate. And the same hold for migration, security, environmental issues. With regard to the economic sector, if we come up with proposals for with regard to plastics, well, 85% of the European citizens do support us. So see, when we propose something positive, we get the support of the citizens.
At the entrance of the hall. On va continuer avec une question tout au fond de la salle parce qu'on ne veut pas les oublier.
So one question at the back of the room.
Le micro ne marche pas, je vais y aller.
Right. Let me get there.
Voilà, je suis là.
Donc, je suis...
Here am I. Hello. I actually am a student at the Franco-German College of Saarbrücken. I have an issue or a question here about Euroscepticism, and I wanted to know whether these political parties actually are wrong, or are there ideas that are not necessarily wrong. This is exactly what I meant, actually. If Europe doesn't keep their promises, it makes sense actually for people to become more skeptical about Europe. But I really do hope that we can try to make more sense about this, because completely rejecting Europe is not about being Eurosceptical. It's about hating Europe. We need to get rid of that sentiment. We don't need to love Europe for the sake of loving Europe. I mean, this is just as stupid as hating Europe. And then, quite frankly, all major issues in the world will only be solved in a much broader context, and certainly broader than the nation state. And I certainly do share the opinion of Emmanuel Macron, saying that if we want genuine sovereignty, we definitely need the European layer, because a man all alone in a desert is sovereign. He's starving, but he's sovereign. And that's exactly what I would say about national sovereignty. It's nice for 5 minutes, but it doesn't solve any problems, because when it comes to talking about solving problems, we need European sovereignty, and that's why we need to get together all member states. Maybe Eurosceptical or the Eurosceptics sometimes are right or wrong. Well, if I have to answer that question, you need to make a distinction between the people who are profoundly Eurosceptical and the people who really hate Europe and certainly would like to see the end of Europe. So let's make that distinction from the outset. But now, this being said, what we observe right now, and I certainly would like here to be or to speak in a very open fashion, and I certainly think that since Trump took office, saying America first, we've seen people going against really going against solidarity across nations or across states. And maybe you will think that Boris Johnson is quite nice or a nice chap, but quite frankly, we think that in the UK they have not understood that it's no longer the 19th century here, but that they should come out and spell the 20th century. The thing is that you shouldn't lead people to think that even France, the UK, Germany don't talk about Luxembourg, but don't think that these major states can actually solve the major issues separated from one another. It's not true. It's delusional. We are, as a matter of fact, living in a very complex institution that's obvious. It's really stating the obvious. But maybe if we ask the question, what do you think about the EU in 2050, I'm not sure that the current complex structure will be the same in 2050. And I do not want to hurt anyone, but I really think that the next 2 generations will make a step toward a stronger union, a more integrated union. That's why it's also important maybe to challenge Europe. Think about the Treaty of Lisbon. Treaty of Lisbon was promoting more Europe. But at the Council, they've gone in the opposite direction. Opposite direction, because they tend to, let's say, withdraw within themselves. And they tended to become more, let's say, nation. They tend to actually be more focusing on themselves than on Europe. Yes.
Bonjour, je viens également du lycée franco-allemand de Saarbrück et ma question est de savoir...
Here's my question. How do you think you will be able to reconcile the production of greenhouse gas, the green, and the cattle breeding? Well, agreements have been found at across the EU. There are agreements, European agreements, to reduce nitrates. Is that what you say? Nitrates production, and it's going to be up to the Commission to see to it that the Member States comply with their commitments. But now, if you see things on a longer term, let's say in 1 or 2 generations, I don't see how we can possibly carry on living or the lifestyle, carry on with the lifestyle we have right now. I don't see how we can possibly carry on in such a way, eating meat and meat products. I don't think that we will be able really to, and I don't think that we will be able to lower the increase in temperature. So yes, the challenge is ahead. The challenge is really major. And fortunately enough, current technologies and technologies will certainly allow us to really take up the challenge. But I guess also that the farming, the farming field will also have probably to take up the challenge of the green farming. I guess that it's going to be possible in Europe, but I can tell you that sometimes I fear that we are not really able to do it or to achieve that objective or that goal, because when you have a look at our ways of consuming foodstuffs, if we consume the same way in Europe as they do in America, I really fear we will not be able to reconcile all these objectives. Many more questions. Hello, good evening. Is a federal Europe in a position to compete the US or China? Federal Europe. Oh, that's for me, says Jean Selborn, because I was really referring to it for 2050. Now, have a look at the current situation in Europe, or the current circumstances in Europe. The current Europe now has to fight with the means they have. And I'm going to give you an example of one of our main features. At the end of the year 2000, I was campaigning and I was traveling worldwide, and all the ministers I met with told me that they know that Europe stands for values, the principles, some clear principles like human rights. Without the shadow of the doubt, that's what Europe stood for at that time, the end of the year 2000. Frans Timmermans, in his daily work, actually is trying to keep on going in this direction with a few of us. But you know very well indeed that we have to deal with, countries which no longer really comply with, let's say, the rule of law or the fundamental rights. Think about what's going on in the eastern part of Europe. So this should really remain the basics of our European identity. We will find solutions for Brexit. That's my opinion. We will also find a way out with the euro. We will find solutions for Brexit. We will find solutions for euro and for the eurozone. But if one day Europe of values and principles disappears, we will no longer be able to set it up again. Because it was really something that was coming out of the Second World War and probably the First World War. Because it was really at that time that we wanted to show tolerance, that we wanted to also comply with rights, fundamental rights, and neither Europe nor China well, if I can rephrase, economically speaking, we are probably the largest stakeholder worldwide. But there's no button on which we can push to end the war in Syria. We have no button to push on to tell the Americans what ought to be done in the Middle East or to end wars wherever they rage. But quite frankly, we need really to stand for values and to stay there. A fortnight or a month ago, I was in Denmark and I was discussing, not in French, by the way, I was discussing with citizens, just as we do right now. And quite frankly, they support the EU in Denmark. Why is that? Because they do not want Brexit or a Brexit-like. They've seen Trump. They don't want a Trump-like event. Russia, they're worried. And I was discussing with them, and they were telling me that we should increase or enhance cooperation, tackling climate change, digitalization, and so on and so forth. And in order to achieve this, we need also to find compromise solutions across the member states. Oh, yes. And I said, it means that we have to share sovereignty. And the answer was, nope, no way. No way. As soon as sovereignty or federalism pop up in the discussion, all of a sudden people stop thinking, because they really think that Europe is about a super-duper state that would really be imposed upon states and individuals. But that is wrong. It's not what we meant. Here we're simply saying that when we no longer can act individually, we can act together. That's the only thing we say. And if we act together, and if we get results, and if it's good, then I think that the states will be happy to share part of their sovereignty. That's how I would see the approach. But of course, I'm Dutch. I don't come from Luxembourg, and that's where it stops here. Ladies and gentlemen, gents, we still have half an hour. So if I can ask you to be brief and even more to the point, to allow as many people as possible to raise questions. So once again, I try to go around the room. Thank you very much indeed. 2 parts in my question. Very brief and to the point, yes. How can Europe be that strong when they appear to be so divided up on fundamental issues? And second, think about Russia, America, China today. How can Europe be possibly strong when they are divided about fundamental issues? And second question, do you think that Europe is very good at communicating towards their populations? Because it seems there's a gap between what Europe does and what the citizens understand about what they do. There's an issue in terms of communication. Okay, division and communication. Right, listen. Europe is different from China, from the US or Russia. It's not a federation. It's not a Jacobean state. So it is what we have. It is actually a building or that was achieved on the basis of diversity. And this union in diversity, as Frans rightly said so, well, this union in diversity is quite good, because you can have 28 people in favor of their nations while actually agreeing on the fact that Europe is necessary for us to move ahead for us, but also for the planet. And, well, next year there will be only 27 member states left. And last week, actually, there was such a dialogue here in Luxembourg. And as a matter of fact, some states here are knocking on the door because they do want, actually, to take part in the European constructions or in the European construction. Think about the Balkans or the Balkan states. And there, the EU will have to give a chance to all these states to become a member, provided, of course, they comply with all the rules and they meet all the criteria, actually, to join the EU and become a member thereof. Now, this union in diversity is an asset. But when it comes to talking about foreign policies, it's difficult actually for they're on the same policies. Think about the Iranian case. Actually, for years we've agreed, but then. And we were strong because we were together about Iran. It was very different and still is very different in terms of migration. But what is Europe? What it is about? What is it about? Who is in charge of communicating about Europe? We are in charge in Brussels, yes. But at the end of the day, if the national member states, if the politicians in the member states actually don't communicate about Europe, if they keep on saying that, blame it on Brussels, because it's really the blame it on Brussels game, really. And when something is fine, it's because of them. But otherwise, it's the blame it on Brussels game. And that's not right. Actually, you can only, Jean actually will be a better at communicating in Luxembourg than me here, and vice versa for me in the Netherlands. Because we know our cultures, and if all the politicians here don't actually feel the need to properly communicate about the EU, we will never, never, ever, ever have the right support for the EU. You're right. You're absolutely right. And they need to have the will to communicate about Europe. But I do know people who simply do not feel like communicating about Europe. They simply want to communicate and to defend national interests. And that's exactly something that should be criticized and that should be challenged when it comes to talking about the EU and the communication policy. Mr. Hasselborn, last week we had the opportunity to have a look at Mrs. Book film, Grand Age. Then we had a discussion about solidarity. How are you going to tackle this in Luxembourg? Are you going really to tackle this solidarity issue, which is really saving lives of so many people and so many migrants here? The crime or misdemeanor of solidarity? Since 2015, I've known people in European member states who do not want to hear about having migrants on their territories. It's really part of their policies, and unfortunately enough, they win elections on this basis. This is behavior that should be rejected. But of course we need also to communicate and to explain why we are opposed to that kind of behavior. We have walked the talk. We have walked the talk. And maybe it's a good idea really to show some empathy and think about the people who escape fleeing their countries, trying to get to Europe, which is one of the wealthiest places on earth, and think about what happened in 2015 and 2016. Think about what these people need to go through. Now, keep on saying that protecting EU external borders is important. That's fine. that's fine. It's right. I mean, it's very similar to what's going on anywhere else. But once we've said that the Geneva Convention is important, then we should actually offer an opportunity to these people to really get a life. And what we did in Luxembourg was not that huge. The number in terms of resettlement has been reached to what we committed to, what we committed ourselves to do. A few thousand people from Syria arrived in Luxembourg, and quite frankly, I haven't seen the Luxembourg identity being shattered because of these people joining us here in Luxembourg. I've never heard. So some people really are, and I know that, are against having these refugees, and because there are connections between the refugees and between terror and between refugees arriving in our country. Well, we have done what we could to the best of our abilities to have these people here, and of course we still need to enhance the integration of these refugees, and there is a will. There is a will of the Luxembourg government, but there is a will among the population also to have these people on our ground. But I can tell you that this is one of our duties to do so. It's one of our duties to do so. It's not to be the good guys. It's not to be the good guys. It's because it's our duty to do so. Thank you.
Mein Name ist Stefan Kohler, ich bin Vorsitzender der Europa-Union in Luxemburg. Meine Frage, Sie hatten es schon mal angeschnitten, ist...
Mr. Kohler, President of the Young Europeans. There are member states, as you've said, such Hungary and Poland, who challenge the state of law, who do want to get rid of justice, and there are efforts to get rid of independent media, to get rid of the freedom of the press, and to they want to influence the political campaigns, misinformation about the European Union and minorities. The campaign of Mr. Soros and the university in Budapest. Well, we are actually a European Union, and we must make sure that the others will abide by the rules as well. So what did you plan to do? How will things go on with Poland? Is there finally a procedure against Mr. Orban? I think it is indispensable. So could we find a common way to trust one another and to make sure that all the countries respect the rules of the state of law? We are so proud of it in Europe. Well, it is not an easy question. I could speak for hours about this, but what you are saying, the phenomenon that you are talking about is not just European. There is a new definition of democracy based on 3 pillars: democracy, state of law, and human rights. If democracy is used to go against human rights, well, actually, that means making the same mistakes as what we did in history, in the history of Europe. We tend to forget that Hitler and Mussolini were democratically elected. We should not forget about this. So we really have to stand for that state of law. But actually, in the United States or elsewhere, democracy, the dictatorship of majority. Well, that means that we forget about our basic values, because democracy is as much important to protect minorities as to protect the majorities as well. So we should not lose sight of it. Will we be able to fight Poland? Well, it would be complicated. Well, the same holds for Hungary. It's not going to be easy. But as a European, we tended to forget about this, and the enemy was in Brussels, and now it is in Hungary. And then who knows, they will become skeptical, they will want to leave the European Union. But actually the support for the European Union has not decreased for 2 years in Poland. Actually it has increased. 92% of the population is pro-European, so they have to be up to their values. The Commission cannot act on its own. It very much depends on the other member states as well, if they want to be accountable for that state of law or not. If we all think that we live in a glass house, do not throw stones to Poland, because these stones will backlash, will come back to you. So if we start thinking like this, we won't be able to solve anything. We need actually to support the Poles. We need to encourage them. They have to solve this issue by themselves. But as the European Commission, we have to make sure that all the member countries abide by the rules. It is not easy, but it is our duty. With regard to the question about Poland and Hungary, there are other parallel issues. Actually, the European Commission has done a sterling work with the European Parliament. A big majority knows exactly the way we go, but where the shoe pinches it at the level of the Council. There are even people who do not look at you in the eyes anymore. There are 2 or 3 who are bold enough to speak out, and the others wait for the storm to pass. Well, actually, that way it's what I call the coat of indifference that gets bigger, and that is very detrimental to the European Union. Somebody living in Poland, in Hungary, in Luxembourg, or in the Netherlands, that same person is entitled to independent justice, is entitled to the separation of powers. And if it collapses in one country, it will have a direct impact on the image of the European Union. Well, if I can praise my friend in German, I would say that he is a key figure in the European Union, with some others in the Council who really show the way in the right direction. There are also other people like him in the European Commission and the Parliament. There is a vast majority which is on the right side. But here we're talking about the very basic intrinsic values of the European Union. We cannot accept